and welcome to the 2022 edition of our series that's been running for a number of years now, of Tom Mendoza Presents. I'm Martin Kremers. I serve as Dean of the College, named after Tom Mendoza. I'm very pleased to introduce our host for today's discussion, Tom. Today's event is actually a bit of a Mendoza family affair. We're very glad to welcome Tom's wife, Tay, and Ty, I'm sorry, and I just said I never know how to say anything, Ty, and a special, very special first-time visitor to Notre Dame, Tom's son, Jake. Welcome all, and welcome especially Ty and Jake. There's a famous saying that goes, what you leave behind is not just what is engraved in stone monuments, but also what is woven into the lives of others. And Tom is an individual who's really done both. Of course, his name, as I think Jake noticed, right? His name is engraved on the building in honor of Tom's gift to the College of Business in September 2000. But very much beyond that, through his very generous sharing of his professional experience and his personal values, Tom has influenced so many lives throughout Notre Dame and the Mendoza community, supporting our unique imperative to grow the good in business. Tom is the former president and vice chairman of the data services company NetApp, and currently serves on the board of directors of Varonis and Vast Data. Tom joined NetApp in 1994 and was responsible for sales until becoming president in 2000. In 2009, he became vice chairman, and in that same year, NetApp was voted the #1 company in America to work for. For more than a decade, NetApp earned global recognition as one of Forbes' great places to work. Tom has given talks on the power of corporate culture and leadership all over the world to people in such diverse organizations as the US Marine Corps, West Point, CIO Forums, Oracle's Leader Circle, and Stanford University. He earned a bachelor's degree from Notre Dame and is also an alumnus of Stanford's Executive Business Program. Please join me in welcoming our good friend, Tom Mendoza, who will introduce his guest speaker today, David Reilly.
Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Thank you. 4 years ago, Martin asked me if I would start a speaker series. I came here and I did the first one, and then, of course, pandemic happened. But I said to him, I'd rather do a conversation with than ask someone to come in and give speeches. You know, I've had the great pleasure of having conversations with a lot of amazing people, and I've often thought it would be cool if other people could hear what we're talking about right now. So I've done 4 so far. I think the common theme is they all came from very humble beginnings, and they accomplished things that in many cases changed the world, both business-wise and external to business. So my great friend David Reilly, who I've known for 20 years, grew up on the streets of East London as an Irish immigrant, tough spot. And today he's probably one of the most recognized individuals for financial services in IT. He drove 5 of the largest banks in the world's IT strategies to spectacular success. More so than as a businessman, he's a better person. So it's my pleasure to welcome David Reilly. All right, let's have some fun. So David, I already gave away where you grew up. Talk about East London. What's that like?
So first of all, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dean Kremers, and thank all of you for the opportunity to talk with you today. It's the part of London, traditionally, that's the cheapest part to live in. It's where the docks were when they were working docks. And so what that means is it's typically where immigrant families first come, because it's the cheapest place to live. So my parents, Rose and Joe, they moved from Ireland and they settled in East London. Before that wave of Irish immigrants, it was Jewish immigrants before. After the Irish, it was Afro-Caribbean, and then Pakistani, Bengali, and then Eastern European. So a very eclectic place to grow up. I think a terrific place to grow up, but of course not without its challenges.
Let's match this to your parents' story. So your dad, Joe, had no siblings, and your mom?
One of 17.
One of 17.
And in the village area where she was born, that wasn't a particularly big number. 21 was the biggest. There were a few 17s and 18s.
Tell them a story about doing your family tree.
So the student body will probably appreciate this. What we always encourage you, ask the question no one else in the room wants to ask. It's a very important leadership trait. I was scarred by that advice at the age of 6. So it's our first day of the second year of what we call in the UK primary school, elementary school here. And the teacher says, I'm going to give you a homework assignment, first homework assignment that we were given. She said, it's not difficult, go home, and I'd like you to draw you, your brothers and sisters, your mother and your father, and one half of their family tree, either your mother or your father. And I put my hand up, as you can imagine, given the information that we've already shared with you. Miss, what side of the family should we do? And she said, oh, David, that's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that. Do whoever has the most. So there's a little bit of a lesson there. So that night,
I would have said, could I do my mother's? Can I do my father's? Let me get out of this quick. So you grew up in a working class environment. You thought about being a musician, realized you might starve. Tough way to make a living. And then you end up getting in IT. David never got to go to college. To rise up to where he's been without going to college, coming out of that environment, how did this start? IT. How do you think I should be in IT?
It was first through necessity that I needed to get a job. And given the jobs that were available to me at the time, I went to a facility that was at the time called a job center, government-sponsored, where companies would advertise on notice boards jobs that were available. And I found one in IT, but it was the very, very basic job. It was working shifts. So it's a job that doesn't actually exist anymore. When computer programs were run, there were people that had to make sure they ran and finished, and that was manual. You would watch for that. And so I worked night shifts, midnight till 8 a.m. in London, cleaning printers, because at that time all of the output wasn't digital, it was physically done on a printer. So with a toothbrush, had to clean the printer band to make sure that the reports were
Now this
readable
is starting at the bottom.
Yeah. Mounting tapes, discs, that kind of thing, and am incredibly grateful for that start.
And yet, somehow people recognized that you had leadership qualities and promoted you out of that to run the thing. What did they notice? Why would they do that?
I think two things, and I think they're recurring themes. One, I was very, very, very fortunate to be given the opportunities that I was given. There were people, and I know you share this too, you have people in your career that saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself.
That's right.
Who gave you a chance when you didn't think you were ready. And that, I think, allied with, if something was broken, if something went wrong, if one of those programs did fail, I had a tendency to try to fix it and to try to figure out what happened.
You ran toward the problem.
And I came to describe that in terms of how you look back at your career and you think, what advice could I give people in terms of what worked for me? What did I wish I'd known? That's one of them, I think, putting yourself in harm's way. That's the way I would describe it. When nobody wants to take something on, which is generally a task that doesn't on the surface look like it's particularly glamorous or interesting. I think if you have a tendency to do that, and you can do it well, then I think you get to do the more interesting work over time.
And you had two mentors there. Chat about that a moment. I think anybody that you talk to who's had a successful career, regardless of what, at some point, one or two people say, I'm going to help this person. Well, I am going to spend more time than probably makes sense to help. And you had that happen to you.
And two people at HSBC in London, Brian Stacey and Dick Chandler. Without them, I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today.
What did you learn from Brian?
So they saw something in me and gave me an opportunity to no longer work night shift, which, if you've ever worked shifts, even on a part-time basis, is the most miserable existence known to man. It's character building, I think, is the kindest thing we could say about it. But they saw something in me And Brian gave me an opportunity to run a shift and then to run operations. And given the educational background that I had, notwithstanding, again, without my parents, and they encouraged myself and my sister, there's nothing you can't do with hard work and dedication. Brian would critique my work. Before I sent something, if I wrote something, a report, a memo, something that had to go to other people, he would critique it. And I would get back the critiqued output with the red pen written all over it. Don't say it like this, do it this way, do it that way. And I ached for the day that I would finally give him something that he sent back and said, it's fine. It took a few years, but eventually that happened. And without his guidance and coaching, I wouldn't have learned through all those mistakes. And he encouraged me, I think, a second lesson. Mistakes are okay as long as you learn from them and you don't repeat them. They're inevitable. And that, I think, is key. It's somewhat linked to that putting yourself in harm's way.
And also, no one will take a risk if that's not true.
That's right.
But then he eventually was going to retire, and now you're working for formerly his boss. What did you learn there?
So I got promoted, and I had the opportunity to now work for Brian's boss, Dick Chandler. This was at HSBC, still in the UK. And I knew Dick, but I'd never worked for him. And he called me into his office, Tom, and he said to me, you've worked for Brian for a number of years. And I had the scars to prove it, because I had pushed myself so hard, the attention to detail, all the things that matter. And Dick said, the only thing about Brian that I think he needs to improve is I don't think he works hard enough. This was the most terrifying thing I could have possibly heard. But it's another lesson in that you see opportunities that will get you to the first rung of the ladder, and then, okay, there's something north of that. Is that something I want to do, a sacrifice I want to make? Put myself again in harm's way. And as much as I learned from Brian, I learned equally as much from Dick.
So you build a career in a company, HSBC. You then get an opportunity at Merrill Lynch, 4 years, and you choose to go to Goldman, which brings you to America. Why was that important to you at that moment in your life? You were doing great at Merrill. Yet you said, I'm going to take this opportunity, put myself in a very different situation, and move to America. Why?
At that time, there were a few things that I think were unique about IT. If you could combine, this would have been in 2000, IT and financial services, that really was the golden ticket, the combination of the two. An incredibly exciting business.
Why? Because that's a great point. I'm amazed that more people don't get this. You can build careers like in financial services and IT that are very, very broad. But a lot of people didn't see that. What did you see that said that's a golden ticket?
The level of ambition, the way in which technology was going to be used, Tom, how it was going to transform the business, how you were going to be able to serve your clients better. Yeah. You could not do that without technology. The vast amount of information that had to be absorbed in order to then draw insight. A combination of those two things. It's different now because a talented technologist has a world of other opportunities in the startup community, in established technology companies and other industries. But at the time, that was the golden ticket. And head offices were in New York. And so, not dissimilar to what my mum and dad did, who immigrated from Ireland to London, I ended up doing the same and came from London to New York because that was where head office was. And I think it's that same theme of in harm's way. Where could I have an impact, and where could I have the biggest impact? Yeah. And the opportunity to do that at Goldman, I took with both hands. I could not say no.
My favorite story about your time at Goldman was when you thought you were doing great as far as giving talks. You had the opportunity in front of a big boss. How'd that go?
So one of the partners at Goldman that I worked for was a guy called Gary Shermahorn. And one of the things I talked to Gary about during a performance review was, he said, what do you think you need to improve? What do you think you do well? Long list of things that I needed to improve. But what I said I thought I did well was, I'm a decent speaker and a decent presenter, and I'm fairly good at getting complex ideas across to an organization. And so Gary said, great, when's your next town hall? I'll come along. And it was in a couple of weeks, and he came along. And I'm thinking, he's going to see something special here. So the town hall happens, Gary's there and paying attention and making notes. And I'm thinking this thing's going great. Go to see him afterwards. A little arrogant, if I'm being frank. How do you think it went, Gary? I didn't think you were that good. I didn't think you were clear. I didn't think you got your ideas across well. I didn't think you engaged the audience. It knocked me sideways. But there's such a valuable lesson there that as good as you think you might be at something, whatever that particular skill set is, getting that second opinion, getting someone to share that feedback with you. And he taught me something really, really, really important about feedback.
What's that?
He said to me, I can tell you don't like what you're hearing, but you need to understand there are only two appropriate responses to feedback, David. You can say, thank you for the feedback, or you can say, help me understand the feedback. You don't get to argue with it. Now, you don't have to listen to it, and you don't have to do anything about it, but you can either thank me or you can ask me to explain. And that really, really, again, was another one of those moments where, as I'm sure the student body will find, you get driven. You find yourself in a particular place, you get that insight and feedback, how can I be better? And if you embrace that, if you take that to heart, take it away. For me, in this particular example, that meant recording myself, watching what I did, and you know what? He was dead right. He was dead right.
That's a great lesson because, you know, as you move up in your career, you tend to do what they call 360s. That means everyone who works for you around you gets to say how they feel. I remember the first time I did that, I was insulted by half the stuff. And I had someone else say to me, that's just a bad response on your part. They're telling you the truth. You can accept it and do something about it, but I wouldn't ignore it. And that was great advice because that's the easiest thing to do is shut down.
Yeah.
So now you're on a real career path to Goldman. That's one of the world's great companies. Yet you leave to take a more responsibility, very big responsibility of Morgan Stanley, where you have, Credit Suisse was next. This is where we met. So I come to see David, and my company was trying to sell to Credit Suisse for like 3 years. And twice we went in there where we should have won, and our competitor just gave them stuff, so we lost. So we have a conversation. I remember he had old movies on your wall. He's an old movie fan. Sidney Poitier was a very good friend of mine. We talked about that. And I said, David, it's so cool I got to meet you. I probably won't see you again because we're not coming back. We're done here. And he goes, why do you say that? I said, because you waste our time. Twice you've done it. I'm not going to do a third time. And I thought you should know that. I didn't want to just not show up. David took that in and he said, Tom, I would encourage you to keep involved. And if you choose to compete, and if you win on the right grounds, now I can't say if they give it to you. I'll tell you what they've done, and they'll get one shot. And if you match it, you have the deal, no matter what. I'm not allowing them to come back. So we went after deals about $10 million, which was very important to us at the time. We weren't on Wall Street yet. And we won. And he called me from London, and he said, got some bad news. Some news, anyway. And the competitor had dropped the price like 70%. And I walked into the CEO of NetApp. I was president, and I said, look, we got to do this one time. It's a very low margin deal. We'll figure out. And he said, well, when they come back, they're just going to turn. I said, I don't think so. I think David's going to come through if we do what he did, we did. And the reason I tell that story, of all the experiences I've had in business, big business, enterprise sales, it comes down to, can you partner? Can you trust each other? And do you have a relationship that people will trust? Because you don't sell, it's not transactional. Oftentimes you're allowing us to do business with you on things we can't even prove, and things may go wrong. And if you don't have a partnership, it never works. You always wanted that, right? Now, you were pretty young back then. Why did you come to that decision? Because not many of your peers were that way at the time.
When I got that job, it was a chief technology officer job, so responsible for all of the technology infrastructure for Credit Suisse globally. It was the job I wanted, and it was the first one I got. And before taking it, I was lucky enough to interview, I spent time with 12 people who had done that job at other financial services companies to get their advice,
That's
to
fun.
get their feedback. What went well, what didn't go well. And one of the things that came across is you can never do this on your own. It has to be with your team and with your partners. You will have vendors and you will have partners. Partners you pull close. Partners is not transactional. It's about solving a set of business problems for the long term. And that's what you and what NetApp were. Always challenging each other. That doesn't mean you make life easy and you don't have those very robust conversations and negotiations. But when a vendor becomes a partner and when you, as a buyer, take that step to explain your strategy, it's not a transaction. Here's what I'm trying to get to in the long run. Not this week or next month or next quarter, but for the next 3 years. The partners that can help you are the ones you pull close, because when those inevitable bumps in the road happen and you need that help, when, as that advice I got, Tom, you can't be there on your own, when you place a call to someone like Tom or Dan at NetApp, they're there for you. And that's invaluable. And for the student body, throughout your career, you will find it feels like sometimes you can do these things on your own. You almost never can. And it's actually way more fun, as well as a lot more commercially rewarding for everybody to work with partners.
Yeah. I had a mentor myself named John Morgridge. John was the first CEO of a company called Cisco Systems, one of the most successful tech companies ever. And he said, something that you should always remember, the skill that you and I have, we don't know anything about selling a lot of people something. We know a lot about selling a few people a lot. Enterprise sales. And it's a career that doesn't get pushed enough, I think, in universities. Stanford now has a course on it. But it's about developing relationships that you can mine the rest of your life. And you come through for that person and you don't forget, because there's so much on the line. And the key is to understand their business. It's not your product. What business problem is he trying to solve, and can I help him solve it? And if you can do that. So then you went to Morgan Stanley, giant job on Wall Street, maybe the best technical team on Wall Street at the time. And yet, so you had to somehow make an impact. And from an outsider, I looked at it as somehow you made the business more involved in IT. It wasn't just about solving technical problems. The business side saw value. What made that happen?
I think, first of all, to your point, that team was, I'd say, second to none in terms of technical excellence. It was built by people who were technically brilliant. They hired technically brilliant people, and the team worked as a team. It was the most connected, technically attuned, technically challenging team that I'd ever had the privilege to work with. And so for me, this looks like pretty much a solved problem. None of that could be lost. And so you find sometimes when you take on these new challenges, when things are working pretty well, it's very important to be a little bit humble and know that I've got to maintain what those that came before me built, because they've got some stuff here that's pretty special. And just because they hired me, they were doing fine before me, and they're going to do fine after me. What impact can I make? And the impact was about pulling the business closer. And it was about helping the business understand whenever we make a technology decision, a system we want to build or deploy or use, it's really about 5 things. What does it cost? And how reliable will it be? And am I going to give you competitive features so you can go and win in the market? Am I managing the risk properly? And can I maintain the talent to keep the system going? And every decision we make together, we should ask about those 5 things: price, quality, capability, risk, and people. And it was a way, I think, a language we were able to establish to help the business understand, no, I want to go faster there. I'll spend more there. And no, you're right, I'll live with what I have over here. All of us that work in technology, and any of the student body that have or will, one of the defects that we have as technologists is we've never seen a problem we didn't think we could build a solution to fix, even when there's a perfectly adequate one staring us right in the face.
It's true.
And sometimes for technologists, it's important to know, you know what, good's good enough. And if we're not going to help the business grow or help our clients, let's work over here where we're going to do something that's going to make a difference to our clients. And that language, I think, helped translate that to the business and help them make better better technology decisions for us in IT.
Yeah, and I know at the beginning they kind of didn't want to hear it, and at the end they valued it. So then you made what many people thought was a crazy career decision. Famous one on technology because he was doing spectacularly well. He was well known for one of the great firms of the world, Morgan Stanley. And he went to Bank of America, which is one of the two largest infrastructures, financial services in the world. Super complex. They had all kinds of issues. There was stuff that was going on that maybe wasn't even obvious when you took the job. And a lot of people told you were crazy to take it.
Yep.
And then you took it.
Yep.
Today, you would say it was one of your best decisions ever, which seemed that there was no way. I saw him 3 weeks after he was in the job. He looked about 30 years older. Is that not true?
It's very true.
What have I done?
It's one of the reasons you do need to surround yourself with people that will be violently honest with you. He came to see me in the office. And the fundamental part of our relationship is I'm buying things that his company provides. And he looked visibly shocked and was concerned for my well-being, my physical and mental well-being. And you were right. But I think that's one of those examples where even in business, in what can seem like a clinical or cold or remote or sometimes transactional things, if you're lucky enough to work with people who care about you and have your best interests at heart, commercially, professionally, and personally, that's something you can't buy and I don't think you can teach. He had it. I've been lucky enough to work with a handful of people that did. And that was a very important conversation where what you saw, you were frank and brutally honest with me, and I needed to hear it.
He had a situation where they had already made a decision to outsource a lot of stuff. He was thinking he was going to re-architect, but they were going to outsource to a firm. And when he looked at it, he knew that wasn't in the bank's best interest. Now, you were reporting, there's only two people above you in the entire bank. And he went to them and told them that they were dead wrong. And you had not been there very long.
No. And you're faced with those career decisions from time to time where whatever ability, experience, know-how, talent you have, you've been brought in to make things better. Always with that mantra at the back of your mind, Tom, you've got to make it better for the next person. So what they get is better than what you were given. At that time, we had gone through so many integrations. We had bought so many different banks that the technology footprint wasn't as integrated as it needed to be, and we had outsourced a lot. And the technical team, the team that I was responsible for, had lost a lot of hope. They did not think management would give us the backing to fix this. They knew what needed to be done to be fixed. You will work throughout your careers with people closer to the problem. They're the people to always listen to. They know what's wrong. Your job is to help them realize the things that need to be fixed. This team had given up. To your point, it was clear what needed to be done. It wasn't a popular thing to do. One of the companies that we had outsourced to was also a very large client on the investment banking side. So not only were we spending a lot on a service that wasn't working the way we needed it to, that company was also our largest technology investment banking client. And you reach a point where you say, I've got two choices. If I carry on this path, I know I'm going to get fired. I know I'm going to fail. Or if I try to fix this, there's a reasonable chance I'll get fired. But at least I'll go trying. And it struck me, even in large companies, there's a finite number of people that you need to explain the decision to. You're right, there was two. Kathy, who hired me, and the CEO. We took the problem to them, explained.
CEO's a Notre Dame grad as an aside, Brian.
Yep. Here's what it's going to take. It'll take us 5 years, but here are the benefits that we'll get year 1, year 2, year 3. If we fail to deliver those benefits, you should take the right disciplinary action, but we can get it done. And we got the backing to do it. And the most important thing I think about all of that, Tom, was we did it with the partner. We were very frank and honest. I went out to the West Coast to see the company, to see the CEO and explain what we were doing and why. And they were great about it. And the most important thing, I think, the team started to believe.
Yeah.
They started to re-engage, they started to commit, and started to see that, you know what, we can persuade the company to do the right things. The onus is on us to explain it in ways they will understand and that they can give us the support we need to fix the problem.
I would say that most people that end up running companies, we used to have an executive staff, and our CEO, Dan, who's going to be my next guest in this series, said, if you don't speak up and tell the truth about a hard problem, I'll probably have somebody else on the executive staff soon. When you get to a certain level, if you're not going to tell the truth and you're not going to take on the problem, you're going to try and push it aside, you're really not that valuable. It takes courage. It takes a lot of courage. I want to get to Empower. I want to take, but one of the things that you and I have talked about is the value of relationships. Everybody I know, Howard sitting in the front row here, Howard runs IBM Cloud, but he was part of this team. The best people know how to make relationships two-way where we both win, and they go on for life, and they usually get outside of business. Talk about why that's so important and how it's helped your life.
I think no matter what you do, no matter what you achieve, no matter what level of success you enjoy, everybody, and I'm sure this is, having listened to a number of the Tom Mendoza Presents sessions, everybody needs people to give them that second opinion, to give them that advice in those moments where they need it. People they can trust, who really have their best interests at heart. And when you go through some of these challenges, whether they're commercial or professional, it's inevitable that you'll build those personal relationships. If you act with integrity, you'll build those relationships. And then when you need that help and advice, then that person is there for you. And I think that is perhaps the most rewarding part of it. Seeing people grow and develop is number one. There's no substitute for that. To see somebody grow in their career that you give an opportunity to and you play some small part in coaching is probably the most rewarding thing. But to have that network, to have that group of people that you can rely on, it's one of the things that in the wake of the pandemic I do worry about, because you need face-to-face interaction to build those relationships. It's not going into the office because of the meeting or the call. It's the moments in between. And it's those moments in between where you build culture and you build those shared experiences and you build those relationships. Everybody needs them. There isn't anybody I've ever worked with, Tom, that didn't. And everybody has valued them and has grown as a result of them.
Totally. And I would just say this, closing this off, the University of Notre Dame, you get to meet all kinds of people. And a lot of people in this room, Grant, just the other day, reach out and people will respond. You know, and people in this, when they call it the Notre Dame family, I think at the core of it is you feel like you want to give back. Pay forward and give back. And that's different than most schools. You can feel it. So we all know the Martin's mantra, which is the good in business, grow the good in business. There's a thing called Empower in New York that David drives. He joined their board in 2014, and he's been chairman of the board since 2017. It's one of the most impactful things I've ever seen business come together to drive. I want you to talk a little bit about the mission, and then what drew you to it, and then I want to talk about the impact it's making. Well, I went to my first event. David was there, and I think there were 1,500 people in New York City, every top financial person there, buying tables to help underprivileged kids in a way that's incredibly impactful. So maybe you can take it from there.
Yeah, I will. Empower, our mission is to serve young adults from underserved communities and military veterans who are transitioning out of the service get the training they need to start to build a career in technology. For most of the students we serve, a college degree is not in their time horizon. It's not going to be something they get to experience.
Many of them don't have high school degrees.
Many don't have high school degrees and haven't experienced a graduation. Every company out there is looking to build a more diverse workforce, diverse in thought, diverse experience, diverse in background. And what we do at Empower is we can provide a match with the young adults from the underserved communities across the US that we serve and military veterans. It's extremely hard for a vet to transition out of the service and get a full-time job. And for the student body, you will never work for a company that doesn't want to hire both of those kind of demographics. Young adults from underserved communities and military veterans. And what we do is we provide technology training to take them from zero to an entry-level position. Since 2014, we are now serving about 2,000 students a year, up from 200. And the growth here is important, and I'll link it to Dean Kremer's Grow the Good in Business. So we'll now serve 2,000 students a year. Our budget's 25 million now a year. We raise 25 million a year. That was 5.7 million back in 2014. We serve about, we work with about 400 now, I think it is, employers. Why do those numbers matter? They matter because when a student comes to us at NPower, on average, they're making $9,000 a year. And that's part-time work and minimum wage work. And when they leave the program, on average, we can get them up to $50,000 a year. And that is the path to economic mobility. It's only the beginning, but it is at least the end of the beginning. And one of the things we've all observed about our industry, many industries I'm sure share this, but I know technology. We're the ultimate meritocracy. 2 years in, if you get an entry-level position in technology, 2 years in, nobody cares where you came from, what school you went to, where you grew up. They care about what you can do. Can you code? Are you a good database administrator? Whatever your particular technical discipline will be. And so the ability to be able to marry that meritocracy, to give these kids an opportunity to get on to economic mobility and independence is solid gold. We hold, to Tom's point, many of the students that we serve, they didn't get to experience a graduation, their families didn't. And as you can imagine, many they weren't necessarily brought up by two parents, sometimes one, sometimes another family member. We will, in New York, in auditoriums like this, there's one at Bank of America, there's one at Citigroup, we actually hold formal graduations at the end of the training. And 2 students will speak, and all the students will come up and have the graduation. They will have their family members in the audience. I can't tell you how many of those I've been to. I always sit in the front row, because I cry like a child. I can't help it. As many of these things you've been to, that's
I've been to a couple, and I never felt an emotion like that because they're so proud, and their parents are bursting with pride. And you go, now that defines the good in business.
It really does. And what we can do, whether it's through helping raise that money to get from 5.7 to 25, we've got our biggest gift ever this year from Mackenzie Scott. God bless that woman. She gave us $15 million. It's our biggest single gift. We can do a lot more. The more kids and vets we can get onto that 50,000.
And it's all over the country now too, right? It's not New York, just New York. It's all over the country. It's just one of those things, if you experience it, but it brings home what you've been saying, Martin. I mean, this is what it's all about. So with that, I'd like to thank David for coming out here. It's his first time at Notre Dame. And we'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. Anything you'd like to ask or chat about? Thank you. We have people with microphones, so if you raise your hand, if you have a question, they'll come to you.
I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. Both of you talked about the importance of having mentors, but also having a certain humility to, even though you're extraordinarily successful in your cases, to still always look for ways where you can improve, where you can learn. Can you share a bit, especially for all of us, myself included, share a bit about how you go about finding good mentors, and anything you can say further about humility?
I think the most important quality is that it's someone that you genuinely feel has your best interests at heart, that they're willing to spend time with you and give you that advice and guidance, good and bad. When you need to hear it, it's often the time you absolutely do not want to hear it. And they're willing to tell you twice and 3 times if you're stubborn enough, like often is the case with me, I'm afraid, where I don't hear it the first time. I think for me, that's the most important characteristic. It's someone that you can be completely unguarded with, and somebody that you feel genuinely has your best interests at heart. It's not always easy to find those people, but when you do, don't ever let them go.
And I think it's important that you realize they're not there to solve your problem. They're there to give you honest feedback. It's like when you're on a board of directors of a company, you don't run the company, but you can ask intelligent questions and remembering that they're going to have to live with the result. So when you ask for feedback, if you have the right mentor, you owe it to them to have narrowed down kind of questions where they can be helpful. It can't just be, so what do you think I should do? It's not really a great conversation. But if you say, I'm facing this, this, and this, these are two paths I'm considering. What would you ask? What questions do you think would be good for me to ask? And then as they get to know you, they can say, Martin, we've had this conversation 3 times. Each time I give you advice, you don't take it. And you're stuck in a rut. I don't think we should have that conversation anymore. Ty knows I've had that conversation with a good friend of mine. And I said, let's talk about something different, but I'm not going to have that conversation anymore. You just like to bitch. You're not doing anything about it. Technical term. Do you have a question? Raise your hand.
David, you mentioned that back in 2000, you thought that one of the decision processes you went through is you saw business and financial services requiring IT to kind of make a pivotal leap. I wonder if now, today, in 2022, which industries you see might be able to adopt IT to make pivotal leaps, like medicine, research, biotech, whatever you think.
It's astonishing how things have changed since just 2000, and the advances in technology, and in particular, the ability to draw insight from data, from the ability to go across vast amounts of data to pull insights out. It's changing how medical research is done. It continues to change how financial services are delivered. It gives you the opportunity for large companies to seem like they're small, where they're dealing with a customer segment of one. Whether you're in insurance or healthcare or financial services, all your clients may be going through something that is unique to them. It's their experience today that they've never had before. Their child is going to college. God forbid, someone in the family is ill. It's a one-of-one experience for them. As a company, you have the opportunity to look across all the data in your history and your experience and say, we've seen that before. We've seen that pattern before, and we've seen a number of outcomes that can follow. This is the moment for us to step forward and to help our client with that insight, say, there are 3 things we might be able to help you with. And in that moment, I think you do that right. And it's the combination of data analytics and the advances in artificial intelligence that can make the big companies seem small. We all, in our lives, we deal with companies in our lives who sometimes feel like monoliths that cannot be penetrated, that do not understand us. Whenever you get one of those moments where the company is talking to you because they've been able to see the information, it's unique to you, but they have experience that you can leverage, that I think is what's going to change the way we work, learn, live, conduct business. And I don't know that there is an industry that isn't able to take advantage of that. If at the heart of it, what you're trying to do is, I've got customers whose I've got to have their best interests at heart, and I want my big company to seem, in that moment, small, dealing with a customer segment of one.
Something we haven't touched on today, your question makes me think about it. It's not just the industries. I look for companies with great cultures. I look for, if I were looking now, I'd want to know when a young person comes in, do they develop them? Do they give them opportunity when they earn it, or do you have to be a certain age to move forward? There's certain companies just, if you're not X amount of years old, you're not getting it. Is it a meritocracy? And I've always believed you should go somewhere you feel like you're constantly learning. Every time I've left the companies because I didn't feel like I was growing or learning, That's what you did. When David made his choices to leave, he never was unhappy and it was doing poor. He just felt he could learn and make a bigger impact somewhere else. So when you're thinking about companies, I would talk to people who work there and I'd ask that set of questions. Are there people who have been here a couple of years and they moved ahead fast? But, you know, what does it take to get responsibility here? You know, and what do I have to do? And people will tell you. They'll be honest, say, hey, forget about it. Nobody here thinks that way. Or they'll say, you know, we're that kind of company. If you'll come in here and take responsibility, you'll take hard jobs when they come. With the best employee we ever had at NetApp, Suresh Vasudevan, and everybody agreed. I was in a meeting one day and they said, if we could solve the top 3 problems in NetApp, who would you put on it? And that would make us grow faster. He was the answer to all 3. And none of them reported to him. He was in business development. He ended up almost being CEO. He is CEO of other companies now. But we had a new head of HR and she said, you know, it's my first day. How do we hire more? What is Suresh doing? How do we hire more of him? I said, there's 3 things. Number 1, he takes a very broad view of the business. His job is this, but we're not secretive about what we're trying to do. So I find myself bringing him into all kinds of conversations because he thinks well, number 1. Number 2, he's very good on cross-functional teams. What is that? Well, if you're in a big company, I'm running sales, he's running engineering, and we have a problem on something and support, we need people from all 3 organizations to go figure out how to solve it. Everybody wanted Suresh on those teams because he didn't care who got credit. He just figured it out and got it right to an answer. And the last thing is, and this is the magic bullet, if people say this about you, your career will explode. Whatever you gave him came back better than you thought it would. You're not saying, oh, whatever you gave him, you didn't even think about it anymore. The result was going to be better than you expected. If that's true, people give you another hard problem and another hard problem. And that's a key thing. People go, I'm really good at the things I like to do. Well, guess what? Most of the time, companies do not get better because they're doing the things they're already good at. They're doing things that are hard. And if you just say, I'd like a shot to help that, and then you help it, you don't got to solve it. But if you have that attitude and you can move the ball forward, people will give you responsibility much younger than you might get it any other way. How are we doing on time? I want to be, it's okay? Oh, cool.
I don't want to interrupt your question, but my name is Tayo. Nice. Thank you both for coming. You both mentioned earlier about growing relationships with mentors and with people who you meet in your network, and even being in rooms where you may have opportunities to connect with senior leaders and executives. My question for both of you is, if you are in a position where you have access to certain amounts of people who you never thought you would have early on in your career, you mentioned having a 2-way street of value. If you're not sure on how to add value, how would you go about figuring out how to add value to someone's life or someone's career or some of their objectives if you did not know when you met them before?
I think it's going to come down to the questions that you ask. Generally speaking, if you're with someone that maybe in that organization is a peer, or it is someone that maybe in the hierarchy is currently more senior to you, the default switch for most people is they want to help. That if you ask, you'll get that help. Even when people are incredibly busy, now you may get, can you come and see me later, or can you call me or send me a note? But that's a signal that that person wants to help. Ask smart questions. Ask how they did what they did, what could be done better. If there's someone that works closely with you, what do they see in the way that you operate that could be done differently? What should you do more of? What should you do less of? What are the biggest challenges that they see that we need to fix today, tomorrow, next year? I would think through, how can you use that moment to draw experience, insight, advice, guidance, feedback from that individual? And you do that through asking questions. I've found almost everybody wants to help. Almost everybody wants to share their experience with you, because even when you're incredibly busy, everybody knows that they got there through the help and guidance and advice of others. And without that, they wouldn't be where they are. And that's why I think the default switch is that to give back. So I would say always be open and ready, as difficult as it sometimes can be. And I think you're right, Tom, you need organizational courage sometimes to do it, to ask those questions.
You know, my leadership mantra, I didn't come up with this. I think Teddy Roosevelt was given credit, but is people don't care what you know unless they know that you care. They just don't. And I think if you take the time to know people, if you take the time to know who they are, what makes them tick, what are their hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and once you know that and you keep that in mind and you try to help them achieve those, people will do almost anything. I gave a talk at West Point 2009. It was the 43 cadets as selected by the 4,300 cadets as the next great generation of leaders. 1/3 of them were women, interestingly enough. 2009, they were all going to Afghanistan in 90 days. In the final moment, and when I talked about this leadership style, they're like this. They all understand great leadership comes because you know it. But I said to, the guy said, "What's your leadership advice for us?" And I said, well, he said, "How many people were at NetApp when you joined?" I said, 32. He said, "Each one of us is going to run a unit in Afghanistan in 90 days, and that is 32 people." And I said, "It's not a lot of people. But you should ask that question yourself. What are their hopes? What are their dreams? And what are their aspirations?" Because if you know that, and they know you know that, when you have a conversation with them, you know, "Howard, you told me you wanted to do this. I think I can help you with that now." The fact that you care enough to ask and know means a lot. And then I said, you also should not, you can do it yourself, don't make somebody else do it. Don't make somebody do something you don't want to do. And this was right at the end, and the war was blazing at the time, and I said, if it's between you coming home alive or one of your people coming home alive, they got to believe that they're going to come home. And they went from dead silent to a salute and walked out together. It was like, whoa! It was one of those moments. At the end of the day, true leadership is you'll do anything for the people working for you. And when you're on that team, and think about any great team you've been a part of, you're honored when they ask you for help. You're honored to do your part. You came to do that part. That's why I think as leadership, you got to make sure people look left and right and they're proud of who's sitting there. And you can do amazing things. One more. Back there. Thank you for the questions, by the way. It's
Thank you.
terrific.
Hi, I'm Luke, and I just wanted to say it's been an honor to attend this conference today and hear what this conversation and all the advice that you've given. My question, Mr. Reilly, is you talked a lot about taking opportunities and moving to jobs with more responsibility and such. I wanted to ask, if you had any advice about, especially for young people in business, taking those opportunities, even if it means taking risks in terms of going against, let's say, for example, at Bank of America, like the advice of your superiors.
There's two things I would say, Luke. One is it's important that as you go through your career that you're clear with yourself on the price you're willing to pay for your career at that stage. There will be times in your life where you can give everything almost to the company you're working for, and there are times when you can't. You'll have something going on outside. Know where those boundaries are, because I think if you don't, and many of us have made that mistake, you end up resenting. And it's because you weren't clear with yourself. You weren't honest with yourself about the sacrifices and the price you were willing to pay for your career. If you do know that, then I would say try to put yourself in harm's way. And the second thing, and I wish I had been, and I wish I still was better at this, as you progress, you'll be given responsibility for those units of 32 people and more. One of the things as you progress that's always inevitable is you will be given more bad news. Your teams will have bad news they have to deliver to you. I wish I had been better at receiving that bad news. People sometimes remember what you say, Luke. They almost always remember how you make them feel. And under pressure, it can be sometimes too easy to make the person for whom it's already difficult enough for them to share that bad news with you, that you can make them feel small, or you can make them feel personally responsible for it. The temptation to do that is great. It is always enormously damaging. In the moment, selfishly, you might feel better because it's actually being lazy, rather than taking the time to understand what went wrong, how can we avoid it happening again, what support do you need to do that. You can be demanding and you can expect very high standards without people being frightened to tell you bad news. And in big organizations in particular, if the culture isn't right in terms of bad news isn't like wine, doesn't get better with age, the faster we know, the better. As a manager, you have an explicit responsibility to create the conditions where it's easy for someone to share bad news. Now, it doesn't mean if the same person keeps delivering the same bad news, you don't have a different conversation there. You do, and you can be demanding. But if you create an environment where it's difficult for someone to give you bad news, that's a failing on you as a manager, not on the individual. I wish I'd been better at that I had received bad news with more grace and more humility. Too many times I made the person delivering it feel bad, and that long term is very, very destructive. As you progress in your career, it's one thing I would keep in mind. The best people I've worked with, they were demanding, and when I had to deliver bad news, the best people I was never frightened of, but I never wanted to disappoint them, Luke. And that's what motivated me. The fear of disappointing someone that I had that much professional respect for was what drove me. It's very easy to say, it's extraordinarily difficult to do in pressure moments, but I would try to keep that in mind.
You know, there's a saying, determine what you want, determine the price that needs to be paid, and then determine whether you're willing to pay the price. And a lot of people don't do that. They want, but they don't want to pay the price. I said to a guy one time, what do you want your next job to be? I want to be vice president of sales. Global sales. Great. I said, you willing to travel 70% of the time? No way. That's the job.
Yeah.
Make it a different goal. So one of the things that I always encourage people to do if you look at a career path is go find someone in that job and make sure you understand what it is. And it may make it so you go, I really do want that job. Well, I'm on the wrong path. You know, it's not about titles. It's about impact. It's about happiness. It's about feeling like you're doing something worthwhile with your life, I think. On that note, maybe I'll turn it back to Martin to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you. Let me start with inviting all of us to please join me in thanking both of you for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Appreciate it.
I'd like to give each of you a present as a small token of our appreciation.
Do I need car keys? What are we talking? Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Small token, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
This one is for you, Tom.
Oh, thank you very much, Martin.
This is not Michigan colors, Dean?
Wait. Jeez. That...
Think of it as gold. Tom, we would like to ask you in particular if you want to open your present.
Oh, thank you. Unusual. Oh, yeah. Look at that. Nice. Oh. Look at that. Beautiful.
And there's another present in there as well. That's even...
Oh, there's the car keys. Oh, my God. Are you kidding me?
Oh, wow.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Jakey, what do you think, man? Yeah, you take that. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys. Thank you very much.